This next topic about cameras is a little bit interesting for me because I kind of an amateur photographer a little bit. And so cameras are very interesting because they are a study in balance, how you balance the good and the bad to get the picture that you want. And so cameras are based on three parts, and it's a triangle. This is a lot of times how it's represented. So at the top we have the f-stop. Now that f-stop is defined as the focal length of the lens divided by the diameter of the aperture, or the little hole that you see when you look down the lens. The other side is the shutter speed. And the third is the ISO, or it's just the sensitivity of the film. Or for digital, it's the sensitivity of the sensor. Now, this triangle has this balance because depending on what changes you make to this triangle depends on how the picture is going to come out. So for the f-stop, if I have an f-stop that is low, and that would be like f2, f4, down in that area, up until you get to about f8. F8 we'll talk about in a minute. This means that it's pretty blurry. You can only focus on a little bit, but the background will be blurry. So very short focus range. Or we call that small depth of field. So what that means is if I'm taking a picture and my field of view that I want to take is this distance and I have an object in the center, if I'm using a low f-stop, then my point that I can get in focus maybe this much. Here this will be blurry and this will be blurry. But this allows the most light. So allows the most light. When I get to f8, everything's pretty well in focus. That's the standard usually that they use. So with f8, I may have more of my area in focus. Not everything, but more of it. So there's a saying that f8 and you're great, meaning that that's the standard that everybody kind of shoots for. So that's the medium. And anything higher, and this can go up to about f64, and this is really sharp. But this allows less light because the aperture is closed, is stopped down. So this is less light than the smaller f-stops, and this is very little light. Is getting through to the sensor. But I get the sharpest picture. This also takes short shutter speed. And this we could call average shutter speed. And this one will be a long shutter speed, really long. So now the f-stop, and we've talked about the shutter speed. The shutter speed is just how fast you open and close the aperture. Opens and closes. So if I want to catch just a normal scenery, not much action, then I can handle a long shutter speed. If I want to catch action, then I've got to use a very short shutter speed, something very fast. But long shutter speed gets a lot of light. A short shutter speed gets very little light. So now you see a problem. If I want to get normal scenery, well, because it's a long shutter speed, I can do f64. I can get everything sharp. But if you've ever looked at pictures of like a football game or where somebody's running, there's a lot of action, especially night games, then what they have to do is use a very short shutter speed, very fast. And they have to open up the aperture, which means they need to lower their f-stop. But if I lower the f-stop, then I have a very small depth of field. So if you look at pictures where there's a lot of action, you'll notice that in front of the person or the object that they're trying to take a picture of, and behind them is very, very blurry. They're about the only ones that are in focus. And so this is the trade-off between f-stop and shutter speed. If I want to get action, then I have to open the lens up. I have to open the f-stop up. And that means then that I don't get everything in focus. There's going to be things blurred. If I have the time to keep the shutter speed open a long time, then I can take some nice, clear, crisp shots of scenery, and that's why you get those nice, sharp pictures of the mountains and things like that. So this is part of the triangle. These things offset each other. One way to try to compensate is the sensitivity. So with the low sensitivity, then I get what's called a nice sharp picture. But at high sensitivity, a lot of people call it grainy. You can actually see the dots. I think look at the old time pictures. Those were uh, uh, pictures where they have grain. When you do high sensitivity, you get that. You have to have that high grain um, uh, effect. A lot of people don't like it in digital. The old film, it's an art form, but for some reason, certain people don't like the digital grain. They say it's just too random. But this is the pros and cons of using your ISO. You can get a higher sensitivity, which allows you to decrease your shutter speed, which gives you the ability to lower or raise your f-stop, which gets you a uh, better picture, more in focus, but you're going to have more grain. You're going to have more of this, it looks like sandy look, or however you want to put it, dotty, pointillism type picture. But if you want low sensitivity, which means you want a sharp picture, then you're going to have to open your f-stop. You're going to have to increase your shutter speed, and that means then you're going to have more blur or not as sharp of a picture. So it's a balance. It's a balance between these three parts, and if you understand how to balance it and the effects that you get, then you can actually kind of take a look at something and figure out artistically how you want it to appear, and you know how to set the camera. It takes practice, but it's kind of fun. It's a neat hobby. Now for digital cameras, they use a sensor inside. It's in a matrix, and here you have what you see is this would be one cell or one pixel. It's actually made up of four. And this cell has a red, two greens, and a blue. So this would be your next pixel, and then the next pixel to it, and the next. So these pixels, these are filters, red filter, green filter, blue filter. These are combined to give the color of that one pixel. So if your camera is an 8 megapixel camera, then multiply that times 4, so that's 32 megapixels. Each of these little sensors is taking its own picture, and these are in grayscale actually. The camera doesn't understand color, it just knows that the grayscale with this red filter is some value. The grayscale with the green filters is this value, and the blue, and then it combines it and creates color based on how this sensor is set up. And one of these units is what we call a pixel, and it relates to what we call the circle of confusion. And that is the area where we can still, or where the image is not sharp. And for most digital cameras, it's considered to be at the pixel level, because you can't go any further down than the pixel. Now, there are two sensor types. The old cameras worked on what was called a CCD, and that stands for Charged Coupled Device. These are the old cameras. They're very slow. Nowadays, they're used for security cameras, video players. The other type is called CMOS, and that stands for Complementary Metal Oxide Semiconductor. and these respond very quickly. So it gives you the ability to take pictures right one after the other.